Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 270 of the MTG Goldfish podcast. I'm Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have a special episode this week. It's kind of a weird time in the world of Magic. Paper Magic, really slow right now. Spoilers, not starting till the end of this week for Ikoria. So we're doing a special episode today. We have no Richard. Richard's sitting this one out, but we have a very special guest, legacy and vintage writer for MTGGoldfish.com, Joe Dyer. Joe, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you guys for having me. It's great to be here.
And, of course, to go along with Joe, we do have content creator extraordinaire, Krim. How's it going today, Krim? No mice or anything eating through your internet this week?
No, my internet works, as much as my ISP will allow it to. So, yeah, it feels good.
So today's cast, as I mentioned, we're in a kind of weird time in the Magic world where because of coronavirus, things have kind of like slowed to a crawl in the Magic world. Outside of digital, there is a lot going on in digital. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming product schedule, a couple changes there, but we're going to spend the bulk of the podcast talking about formats that we really don't cover nearly as often as we should. In Legacy and Vintage, which is Joe's kind of expertise, Krim is very much a noob in those formats. He has some questions. I have some questions. So if you're interested in these formats, that's going to be our main topic. And then, of course, we'll answer some fish mail at the end of the cast. Before we jump into it, a quick reminder that our show today is brought to you by Card Conduit. And if you've ever struggled to sell your Magic cards with just all the time it takes, the effort, sorting, typing, shipping, they got you covered. They're the easiest way to sell Magic cards. And if you're looking to avoid all those hassles of selling your cards, this new service from the folks over at Card Hoarder will sort, grade, and sell your Magic cards. And once your shipment is processed, you'll get the proceeds minus their fee. And right now you can get a 10% discount by going to cardconduit.com/goldfish. So thank you to Card Conduit for supporting the show. And with our sponsorship stuff out of the way, let's first talk a little bit about what's going on in the Magic world before we get to Legacy and Vintage. So the big news this week is Wizards decided to push back the release of Ikoria. Mostly, it's still releasing in digital. Spoiler season is still starting on Thursday, going ahead like normal, but outside of Asia Pacific, the set release itself is getting pushed back essentially a month. I think it's May 14th now when it was supposed to be like April 17th was pre-release. What do you guys think about this change? Was this a good change, a necessary change? What impact is it going to have on Paper Magic? Any thoughts on the delay of Ikoria in paper?
I think it was inevitable, right? Like, I mean, we kind of saw it coming, just with everything going on right now. You really can't be throwing like these pre-releases with a huge gathering and whatnot. We just got, at this point of the recording, we just got hit with another 30 days of, quarantine. So like, yeah, like we kind of talked about it last week and we kind of just foresaw this, right? Like, I mean, it had to happen. And cause they didn't want to launch Ikoria into like a, 2-person pre-release, which are the 2 people are just the store owners.
Yeah, that sounds like a less than fun pre-release. Yeah. I mean, what do you think about this, Joey? Any thoughts on the delay of Ikoria?
Yeah, I think it was pretty inevitable as well. It just seemed to be the thing that was going to happen. I was surprised they didn't announce it sooner, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I feel like kind of the issue is, I don't know if anyone could get Ikoria if they didn't release it. With just how locked down things are right now, a lot of the big vendors are unable to ship out cards right now. You saw like Channel Fireball and Card Kingdom. Local game stores are closed. Even Amazon is mostly trying to ship essentials, and other shipments are delayed sometimes. So even if they went ahead with the release date, I don't even know if it would do anything. Like, technically you could release it, but if no one can actually get the cards, what good is it? So it does feel inevitable, and like it was kind of the only choice to make. It's going to be interesting to see what the long-term impact of this is as far as the sales of Ikoria. I don't know if you remember last year, we had War of the Spark, and then we had Modern Horizons, and then we had Core Set 2019, all within like a 2 month span. Yeah, it was very close together, like each a month apart. And what ended up happening is some of the sets were just less open than others. You can see a huge example of this on Magic Online, where we've had ridiculous prices of Core Set 2019 rares because people didn't play Core Set 2019. They just played Modern Horizons for the most part. So it's going to be interesting with this being delayed, are we going to see something similar where we're having Core Set 2020 coming up in the not too distant future? We have tons of other products. What do you think this does for the amount of Ikoria that'll be open? Do you think this is going to have a big impact on the supply of the cards?
I think it will, just because, yeah, like you had mentioned with M19, right? I mean, we like Nico Bolas, the Ravager. I had to look for him on paper, and I think he's now like $30. I expect a little bit of that with Ikoria, because I mean, by the time Ikoria comes out, we have like you had mentioned, a month and a half, I think, until Core 2021 comes out, right?
Yeah, I think I said the wrong Core Set. It was actually Core Set 2020 that released last year, and it's 2021 this year. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. I think the release date right now is July 3rd. Yeah. Which would mean pre-release would be the end of June, and like full set would be the middle of June. So we're getting to the point where it's going to be like a month, essentially, even less, and we'll be in full-on spoiler season and getting close to the release of Core Set 2021.
I think they may just have to like axe, because we're not even sure that pre-releases are going to even be able to happen by then. I'm to be completely honest, we don't know, right? Yeah. So because of that, there is a chance where there's a part of me that thinks that they might have to release both Core 2021 and Ikoria in a weird way, like within a week apart or something like that, or because there's going to be some crazy bottlenecking, because we don't even know if we're going to be able to like do any of that for quite some time. I mean, this 30-day thing is like very optimistic, right? Like I'm talking like, I think we need to wait like 3 more months, at best.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree there. Like, it's going to be awkward for them to release sets like that. It's kind of a weird time to be doing it. And furthermore, it's going to mess with the pricing on Magic Online too, because, standard pricing on there is already really weird, thanks to, people not drafting that much because of Arena. Yeah. So like it's going to definitely affect prices of stuff, but definitely paper cards for sure. I would expect things from Ikoria to be more expensive.
The nice thing though, or I mean, as you were, Joe.
Oh no, you're fine.
Oh, okay. The thing here is it will mess with paper, but the good news is that we'll have it we'll have it all digitally, right? So yeah, when paper comes out, right? Because like Arena will probably have it, like all that stuff will be out. By the time it comes out on paper, I guess we know what's good to get, right? Like there's no need to spec into it, because we've already now seen months and months of gameplay of standard or whatever, right? So we know what's hot, what's not. And I mean, that's the brighter side of this for those that want to get paper Magic. But at least digitally will be okay.
Yeah, it doesn't really have any impact digitally. What I would wonder as far as paper, though, is like you said, we'll already know what's good. Does that mean people will just not buy boxes, though? Yeah. Like, I think there's a big temptation with standard already being so developed by the time the set actually releases in paper, that rather than being like, oh, I'm really hyped, I want to like open these new cards, and you pick up a box, you might just be like, oh, I need these few rares and mythics that are doing well, I'll just pick those up instead. So maybe long run, this is going to be a pretty under open set. And that's not even, we haven't even considered like people losing their jobs and all the economic stuff that could also keep people from buying cards right now. So I think that long term, we could end up, assuming everything recovers and gets back to where we were, a year ago or a few months ago, it could be that long-term Ikoria is going to end up being really expensive, because I bet that there will not be nearly as many booster box open compared to like War of the Spark, the set that released last year at this time, or Dominaria, which was another set that was massively opened when it was released. So I bet it's going to be a lot lower supply than other similar spring sets. And for sure. Last question on this, do you think there's any chance we get like a ripple effect? Like, Core Set 2020, as I said, it's supposed to release July 3rd, or 2021. I keep saying the years wrong.
Teferi set. 3rd. Just call it the Teferi set. That's what I
would be fine with. Maybe they just cancel that altogether.
Oh, no. Let's not say things we can't take back.
But no, do you think there's any chance we see a ripple effect with other sets being pushed back as well to accommodate for Ikoria being pushed back, which who knows, like they're saying May 15th, like fingers crossed that that actually even is the date when this all works out. But do you think there's any chance that core set gets pushed back and then rotation this fall gets pushed back? Or do you think they're just going to have to power through at some point, in part because, like you said, digital is still happening at the normal pace?
Yeah, because of esports and everything happening at the digital, like, pace, rotation's going to stay the same. It has to, right? But paper is going to be out of sync and it's definitely going to have a ripple effect when it comes to paper. But luckily, competitively, you'll have digital. So no there, but definitely price wise, like I think this set could potentially be pricier than like how Fate Reforged and Dragon's Maze like was pricey. Like those were already like the mythics from those sets, like Voice of Resurgence, Monastery Mentor. They are like, they were ridiculously high. And I imagine the mythics from this set, especially depending on how good they are going to be even pricier if this set is going to be even, like, cause this is it's going to be way less open than those two sets, right? I mean, cause by the time, Core 2021 will already be like spoiler season will already be starting pretty much by the time we get Paper Ikoria. And
Although I don't know how many people are going to want to open boxes of Teferi.set. That I want to rant for the rest of this podcast about the tone deafness of being like, oh, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, oh, Teferi Time Raveler, endless complaints, and be like, hey, guess what, guys? We're making Teferi set for the next core set, so it'll be interesting. Like, hopefully,
don't think it's telling.
Maybe there's some bad Teferis, powered down Teferis, but oh my goodness,
uncommon Teferi with another passive.
Speaking of Teferi, I think this actually offers a pretty good segue into the bulk of our podcast about Legacy and Vintage. So, Joe, you're the expert. You write This Week in Legacy. You write our Vintage series. So you're like very entrenched in the eternal scene of Magic, in digital and in paper as well. So what do you think about those cards? Teferi is a very hated card. I know one of the big conversations this year has been the power level of cards, with War of the Spark Planeswalkers, with Okos and Once Upon a Times, and various formats, feeling like some of the most powerful cards in recent history of Magic have been printed in the last year. Has Vintage and Legacy experience that same upheaval, or are those formats so powerful that it's just like, Teferi, whatever, Oko, whatever, and just kind of like shrudges them off and keeps doing whatever they have been doing?
If you are not playing 2019 to 2020 cards in Legacy and Vintage right now, you are doing it wrong. Unfortunately. So Oko especially, is, very, very much at, a big format, part of the format, especially in Legacy. Since Ren and 6 was banned, and then Oko came around, Oko has been a big part of the format and continues to be a big part of the format. The only time that we really didn't see much of Oko was that brief month that Underworld Breach was legal in the format. And that was because clearly the best thing to be doing in the format at the time was Underworld Breach. However, now we also have Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath. And that goes with Oko really well in every shell it exists in. So, the 2019 to 2020 cards have definitely reshaped all of these formats, honestly. Legacy especially has seen a lot of upheaval because of these cards.
So, what does the Legacy community think about that? I know, like, in Standard, you're kind of waiting for a shakeup. New powerful cards that push out the old decks, make new decks. That's what you kind of want to see. On the other hand, like in Modern, I know people, they kind of want to buy a deck because they're expensive and be able to play it for a long time. So too much change can be seen as a negative, really. What does the Legacy and Vintage community think? Do they like seeing so many new cards rise to the top of their formats? Or is it like, I wish, these cards weren't quite as good as they are?
There's two camps to that. There's some people that will be like, I wish they would print cards that are for Legacy and Vintage, but then when they do print them, they're like, not like this. Not like this. I didn't ask for that. I wanted something for Legacy and Vintage, and Wizard
Monkey's
says,
paw.
here you go. And they go, well, I don't want that. And then there's, some people that are, have kind of accepted it and kind of, fallen into a rhythm with these cards. But a lot of the people I talk to are really just upset about like cards like Oko, especially existing. Veil of Summer is another card that I see a lot of hatred pushed towards.
I agree with that hatred for Veil of Summer.
It's definitely made decks that play cards like Thoughtseize and cards like Hymn to Turok, even though Hymn to Turok hasn't been great in like more years than Veil of Summer's existed. But Thoughtseize especially. Thoughtseiz's decks have been hit really hard.
The end of like getting like your force, like the end of a counter chain just getting veiled is like hilariously like sad.
Yeah, it's better than Flusterstorm currently. Yeah.
Makes sense.
It's scary how bad that is, how that is, but yeah. So it's even like helped certain decks. Like there are certain combo decks now that use it as ways to protect their combo, that sort of thing. Like the Epic Storm, one of the storm-based decks, uses it to protect its combo because it's just plays 4 main deck Veil of Summer, and there you go. So, as far as the Vintage side of things, Vintage saw a lot more weird shakeup with 2019 to 2020, and that was primarily because of War of the Spark more than any other set. Other than Modern Horizons introducing some much-needed cards for that format, War of the Spark brought us both Karn and Narset. And both of those cards were really, really, really strong in Vintage.
And they both ended up being restricted, right?
Yes. Along with
Narset's restricted? Or
yeah,
Karn?
Both of them are.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know Narset.
So what happened was they printed War of the Spark, and then they printed Modern Horizons. And War of the Spark brought us Karn, and Karn brought us these combo decks that basically sought to power out Karn and then power out the Time Vault Voltaic Key combo. And then so
what
the workshops
the
decks. So basically, yeah. So Time Vault is, you tap it to take an extra turn. But it doesn't untap during your untap step. You can choose to skip your turn, use Voltaic Key to just repeatedly untap your Time Vault and keep taking extra turns. But though, because Time Vault's restricted, with Karn, you just need to put it in your sideboard, and Karn can go get it from your sideboard.
It's your additional copies. Okay.
Basically, yeah. So it turns a restricted card into 4 copies.
It shuts off the opposing one, though, right? So that's kind of cool.
But what actually ended up happening is it's weird. You would think these decks would be super dominant in the format, that this would have been the best deck in the format. Well, when they printed Modern Horizons, they printed a card called Force of Vigor. And they also printed a card called Collector Oof, which were really, really good against these Workshops decks. Well, it's come to find out that the only deck you could play that would be good enough to keep up with the Workshops decks as well as everything else in the format was Bug Midrange. And so the format just became completely dominated by these bug decks, to the point where like you had challenge events that were literally 7 out of 8 of the top 8s were bug.
Is this how we got the iconic, like the best way to capture 2019 Magic, with like a Black Lotus getting elked and then swinging in for lethal?
That was even after all that restrictions.
Oh, okay, cool.
Actually, yeah.
Even better.
So they ended up before Eternal Weekend last year. They ended up restricted Karn. They restricted Mystic Forge, which only lasted about a month or so, because that card's absurd.
Pizza oven?
Yeah, that card's dumb. They also restricted some stuff for Dredge. They restricted Golgari Grave Troll, and they also restricted Metal Misstep finally, which was fantastic.
I thought that was always banned. I didn't even know that was not banned.
Oh yeah, until last year, Vintage was a format where you could play 4 Metal Misstep, and it was atrocious because of it, honestly.
So we've been talking about a lot of these powerful artifacts: Mystic Forge, Karns, Time Vaults. I don't know how much of our audience is like big Vintage and Legacy fans. So I would say if you want a really in-depth breakdown of Vintage and Legacy, you should definitely check out Joe's articles. They are excellent. They go up every Tuesday and Thursday, one for Legacy, one for Vintage. But what makes these artifact decks in Vintage in specific so powerful? What is the engine that has made these decks so good?
Honestly, it's basically the prevalence of fast mana in the format.
Oh,
you have power, the power 9, you have, Black Lotus, you have 5 Moxen. A lot of the decks, have additional, restricted artifact mana like Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Mana Vault, all those cards. But also, Mistress Workshop is also a thing. That is a card you can play 4 of in this format.
Yeah.
But
what do you think about that? Where do you come down on Workshop? I know that's been a conversation that's happened for a long time now about whether that should be restricted, and Wizards doesn't really seem to like the idea of restricting it. Maybe because it is ridiculously expensive, and players would be very upset if all of a sudden their workshops got restricted. Do you think on power level, is that a card that's healthy for a format like Vintage? If you're not familiar, Mishra's Workshop is just a land that taps for 3 mana, but you can only use it to cast artifact spells.
Oh, that's balanced.
Yeah. I mean, if
it's not legendary, wow.
No, it's not legendary. No. I actually am self-admittedly a shops player from time to time. So I actually don't mind Mistress Workshop. I think a lot of it also hinges down to the fact that there's a lot of different things to be doing in the format, and I like having some sort of alternative style of play that isn't just blue soup. As much as I like playing a lot of those blue soup decks, I also
what is
like
a blue soup?
Just a deck that is blue/red/ other color, or blue/black/ other color. Any of these Jeskai or bug decks,
okay,
or whatnot that exist that are more fair control deck type of decks.
I think I'm looking right now at the list of the most played cards, and I think this is true of Legacy and Vintage, but just to give a quick bit of context, like in Vintage right now, 72% of decks play Force of Will. And if you know Force of Will, you got to have enough blue cards to be able to cast it. And in Legacy, you're right around 50% for the package of Brainstorm, Force of Will, Ponder, just under 50%. So there are, I'm assuming this is kind of what you're referring to by the blue soup, the decks that are playing these type of packages and then like kind of dirtling around a bit.
Yeah, they're a lot less dirtily than they used to be, though. We've gotten a lot more power creep in the format.
Is this what I've been hearing about? Like how, cause I love Monastery Mentor. I heard at a point that was like a really good deck, right?
Yes. Before they restricted Monastery Mentor,
that got restricted.
Basically the deck to play. Yes, yeah, it is one of the few creatures on the restricted list.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know what? That makes sense though, because it seems like a lot of things in Vintage. I mean, I was today years old when I found out Mental Misstep was not banned until like a couple months ago. Like, wow, free spells plus Monastery Mentor. Like spells pretty much don't cost mana in Vintage, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
So we've mentioned restricted a couple times. What do you think? Well, what is a card being restricted? Just in case people don't know that, and what do you think about having restrictions compared to having a ban list like every other format?
So Vintage actually has both a banned and restricted list. However, cards in Vintage are not banned for power level reasons. They're banned for structural reasons, totally. What I mean by that is they're banned for reasons like anti-cards, like conspiracies, anything that has to do with like dexterity. So like Chaos Orb, Falling Star, those kinds of cards.
That's a bummer.
And also any card that has to deal with sub games like Shahrazad is banned. So anything else in the format is restricted, which means that you can only play one copy of it in your deck. Now, I've actually written about this a couple times. As far as I wrote an article about whether or not Wizards in the future would need to leverage actually banning a card in Vintage for power level reasons, because of the possibility of them printing something that would cause a restricted card to be so good or cause a card that would be so good that restricting it would be impossible. And I think that could happen at some point. I don't think we're there yet, although some people seem to think that we've crossed that threshold with slightly with Bolas's Citadel being in the format. Because if you restrict that card, it does nothing. Most of the decks only play one.
Right.
So being restricted is actually not even relevant to Bolas's Citadel because you're only going to play one copy anyway. And I assume, are you like tinkering that out? Like you're not just tapping 6 mana and casting your Bolas's Citadel in Vintage, I would guess.
I mean, if you have Dark Ritual and Mistress Workshop, you can do whatever you want, right?
Right. I forgot you could do things like that. I think I Dark Ritualed once and I put like some 3-drop zombie and I was like, wow, this is insane. But like in Vintage, that's like small ball in it.
But yeah, mostly you're looking at Tinker is how you're getting that into play. And so, I mean, if you were to say they were to print some sort of artifact that said, you win the game if you have this special condition or whatever, that's not hard to get. You can play 4 of them in your deck. But if you restrict it, you're not really, stopping that at all. It's just, you're just making it so they have to play 1 copy, and that may not be good enough.
Well, in EDH, you have tons of recursion and ways to get cards, right? And like, so I assume in like Vintage, right? That's probably even easier, right?
Oh yeah. Plus you get multiple copies of things like Force of Will.
Yeah.
Ways to stop your opponent from stopping you.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Plus all the restricted cards that are blue are all really powerful restricted cards for a reason. This is a format where Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise are both restricted. Ancestral Recall, Ponder is restricted, Brainstorm is restricted. These are all really, really, really strong cards in a format that has leveraged access to so much fast mana.
Well, okay. Let me ask this as the noob Vintage / noob legacy person. So in Modern, I often laugh hysterically while also simultaneously crying when I lose to a turn 2, a Neo brand deck, right? So like to me, that's insane that you can lose on turn 2, but like, is that common? Like, for
no.
In other formats, like, I mean, I know that I heard that a lot can happen in 1 turn, so it might be like actually 2 turns, but it's like 10 games worth of gameplay from interaction and back and forth.
Yeah, I mean that's accurate actually. There's a lot of things that can happen in a turn, and it can be pretty easy to go off the rails and actually end up with a good board position and being ahead of your opponent on cards in a single turn. Because there's so much leveraged, things like fast mana, but the variance of that is what makes it really high, to do that kind of stuff, because of everything being restricted. When you draw your restricted cards, everything's great, you're happy, blah, 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 but you don't always draw all your restricted cards or some of your restricted cards. You may end up with hands that have no restricted cards in them, so it's just dependent on what you're playing. And especially if you look at the control deck mirror matches, those matches are some of the most longest games of Magic that you could ever possibly play.
Really?
Because they're all about resource trading, and they're all about outplaying your opponent.
Right.
And making sure that you have enough resources to, win the game and stick a threat and win the game.
Because like I would you say it is as slow as like, let's just say like Return to Ravnica blue-white versus blue-white, where
oh god,
because like that
can be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's not too bad.
I bet Grim would actually really love playing, like, I don't know, Xerox or like some control deck in Vintage. Grim would probably, that sounds like your kind of deck, actually. I bet you would actually very much enjoy playing it.
I wanted to play
Xerox would probably be up your
Mentor,
alley.
But I guess that's restricted.
Yeah.
Is that the Xerox deck? I don't know if you know what a Xerox deck is, so.
Jessica Xerox would be the deck you would be thinking about because that's the deck that plays Mentor.
What about Esper? How do we make it Esper?
If you're an Esper, you're probably playing something like Paradoxical Outcome.
That doesn't sound mentor centered.
No. Actually, the primary kill condition of PO now is actually just Monastery Mentor.
Oh, then that's where I need to be.
Yeah.
That's where I need to be.
Because that deck basically. So people that don't know what Paradoxical Outcome is, it's a 4-mana instant where you return any number of non-land permanents, target non-land permanents to your hand. And then you draw a card for each one that you return to your hand. So basically you're leveraging all of the artifact mana, and returning like Moxen and all that stuff to your hand.
Yep. And that triggers Mentor.
And then you're drawing a bunch of cards off of that. And then you're replaying out that mana. And then you're able to, kind of get into a point where you can set up like a Mentor with like a Time Walk. And then you can just like, yeah.
That's so crazy.
We kind of hit on Vintage a little bit there, but what do you think about Legacy, Joe? So, I know one of the common, I would say, in my experience, and Legacy is one of my favorite formats. I don't get to play it nearly as much as I wish I did, but boy, I love Legacy. But my perception of Legacy is it's actually significantly more fair than formats like Modern, and you're more likely to play a real game that goes on for like 10 turns or 15 turns. But I know the common perception, especially from people who have never played Legacy, is, oh, you just die on turn 2. Why would I ever want to pick up that format? Like, it's just, you try to combo. But I feel like Modern is actually the format that's like that. But people think Legacy is like that, when actually, in my experience, it's not. But what do you think about that argument about Legacy?
It's most definitely not like that. Legacy is very fair. There are a lot of dumb, broken things to do in Legacy, but for the most part, like it's gatekept by the presence of things like Force of Will. Like Force of Will, Brainstorm decks make up a large majority of the format, and so do like a lot of fair non-blue decks. So like you have a lot of options to play, actual games of Magic with the format.
Even with Wasteland?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, so the thing about Wasteland is that,
I hate that card.
Wasteland is playable, but it's not like fantastic right now, and that's because of the presence of cards like Arkham's Astrolabe.
Yeah.
Has allowed decks to kind of be able to play around Wasteland a little bit. But as a deck that's like kind of can be soft to Wasteland, you just kind of accept that it exists.
Okay.
Like you just kind of have to be like, okay, yeah, like you have to make a smart play and be like, okay, look, if I get Wastelanded here, it's bad. I have to think a couple turns ahead on how that impacts my game.
Right.
And so, Wasteland's a card, and I like that Wasteland's a card, honestly, because, it helps keep a lot of like the greedier, decks in check. And of course what we've seen is, it's not so much that people are playing Arkham's Astrolabe with like 4-color check pile, like everybody's playing the best colors in the format. They're really just splashing the most impactful cards in the colors that they want to be in. So if you look at like Miracles, which is a deck that...
I like that deck. That deck was fun when I played it.
Used to be more hinged on, top of the library manipulation, and when it used to use cards like Sensei's Divining Top before that got banned. Cards like Predict, that sort of thing. It's more of kind of like a mid-range control deck now, because now you still have access to all these cards, but now you have Astrolabe and you can splash into green for like Veil of Summer. You can splash into green for Oko. There are some versions playing a copy or two of Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, because that card's insane. They're also splashing red out of the sideboard for things like Pyroblast, which is really important. So they're just meatier kind of mid-rangey decks now, but they've never been soft to Wasteland because they've always played a lot of basic lands in those decks, but they're even softer to Wasteland now with Arkham's Astrolabe, or even harder to Wasteland, I should say. Okay. So Wasteland's not as effective against them anymore.
Okay.
And so Wasteland's kind of dipping down. But the meta is really weird right now. So it's kind of like wide open, honestly. Like there's a lot of stuff going on right now.
That's actually perfect, because that's my next question. A little like with Legacy and whatnot. Like, the thing for me and like a lot of people that I know that haven't played Legacy or Vintage, like we all kind of just see the top decks, what's popular, right? And it kind of just all looks the same. So there's like this thing that where everybody thinks that Legacy is just there are no new decks. There's nothing innovative happening, nothing crazy happening. It's just the same Delver deck versus the other Delver deck versus the other Delver deck, right? But is that true? I mean,
I think it's less true now. I think if you would go back, a couple years ago, especially during Deathrite Shaman era, that was obviously very true.
Like Deathrite, Leovold, right? Like everybody was Sultai like Delver. Pretty much.
No, everybody was Grixis Delver.
Oh, Grixis, you said.
Yeah, because you had access to Gitaxian Probe and you had access to Deathrite Shaman, and those cards were really good for Grixis. So like at that time, Legacy's been like that on occasion. I think it's less so now. And that's the only thing I can say that has been good about the 2019-2020 era of stuff, because is that it has
that
enforced people to
affect Legacy and Vintage.
Case in point, one of my friends is a well-renowned Legacy player by the name of Callum Smith. Goes by White Faces on Twitter and also on Magic Online. He developed a deck recently that it uses that new Dryad of the Elysian Grove card, and basically it's a Chalice Ancient Tomb deck, Chalice of the Void Ancient Tomb deck, but it's like mono green stompy in a sense, but it uses Dryad and it also casts Primeval Titan, and this deck is doing well. Actually, like he created this deck and he put it out there, and within a week it had like top 8 at a challenge.
So is it like a super amulet deck then? Is that what it is? Like,
actually,
I would play. Or?
I'm looking at the deck list now. It's funny you bring this up because this was a deck list I was looking at and I saw it, I was like, this looks like a modern deck I've been playing. This does not look like a Legacy deck, because it's just like Tireless Trackers and Primeval Titans and Scavenging Oozes. Like, it is about as fair as a deck can look. I mean, obviously, like, you got Primeval Titan that can get Valakuts and stuff, but it looks like a really fair deck to me.
Yeah, well, what makes it work is the fact that you get acceleration in the form of Mox Diamond, but you also get a Chalice of the Void. And so Chalice of the Void is one of the bigger pieces of the format in regards to how you fight on the axis against blue decks, or how do you fight on the axis against combo decks by using Chalice to cut them off of being able to cast spells.
Like, one drops, I'm assuming, is like what you're looking to put it on? Yeah,
usually 1 is usually your most accurate place to put your Chalice.
I think as a modern player, the thing that you might not realize about Chalice in older formats is a huge chunk of those decks are built around cheap cantrips, brainstorms, ponders, preordains. So Chalice on 1 is actually so insane against a decent portion of the field, because a lot of Legacy decks and Vintage decks, they run very light on lands compared to if you would see the same cards in a modern format. Let's say you see like 4 or 5 less lands a lot of times compared to a modern deck that's built very similarly. Like, I'm looking at the 4-color Oko snow deck that's casting like Uros and Jaces and Terminuses and stuff. Like, that deck's only running 20 lands, which is super low, but that's because you get brainstorms and ponders and you're able to hit your land drops.
They're playing what? 4 are they playing Astrolabe?
They do have 4 Astrolabes as well.
So 4 Astrolabe, 4 Brainstorm?
And 4 Ponders is the list I'm looking at least, yeah.
Brainstorms 20 are like just like a sub game within Legacy, right? Like, pretty much.
Sort of. So 20 lands is actually a little high for that. They could actually, but they're doing it because they have Uro. You could actually go down to 18 there. So the common theory there is that, and this is what we refer to as the Xerox theory. It's something that Alan Comer came up with back in the day. Is that for every 4 Wanda CMC2 cantrip effects, you can shave 2 lands from your deck. And so that's kind of where that comes from. So like you'll see these Delver decks, they'll be playing like 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder, 2 Preordain or whatever, and they'll be on like 18 lands. And they'll be.
And some of those are probably wastelands too that they're looking to sacrifice.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, that's 18 lands, and you figure for a wasteland, that's generally 14 lands at that point. But the cantrips help find you land. And that's and they're operating on such thin margins already, because a lot of their stuff costs 1 to 2. But if you look at like Rug Delver, which is the current reigning Delver champ, they're able to cast 3 CMC spells because they're casting Oko. So it's crazy to think, especially like now that Delver decks are actually getting to 3 mana to cast these cards, but they are. And it's also because of the card Dreadhorde Arcanist also has worked its way into that archetype. So it's interesting to see how the format is adjusted to this 2019 to 2020, but there's some cards that are scary for sure.
I didn't even think about that. That's so good. Dreadhorde Arcanist. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, it's insane.
A format full of like 1-drops and like.
Oh yeah, it's insane.
Like, yeah, that's ridiculous.
It snowballs really quickly.
That's so good.
I think one important thing to point out about Legacy and Vintage, this is another thing that comes up a lot from new players, and it's very true, especially in Paper, is the decks are ridiculously expensive. If you look at Legacy, decks are 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. You can find budget decks or cheaper decks, but that's kind of like the normal price range. Vintage, you're looking at tens of thousands for a lot of decks that are playing the original Power 9 and Black Lotuses and Moxen. However, these decks are actually pretty inexpensive on Magic Online, like comparable to Modern or even Pioneer decks. So right now, lots of people are stuck at home. People are playing Magic Online. What would you say to someone who is playing Magic Online, because they can't really play in Paper right now, has never really checked out Vintage or Legacy, and thinks maybe they might be interested? What advice or what would you say to them?
I would say that you should definitely try it out, first of all. It's a lot of fun. Magic Online is a great way to get into the format. It's also a great way to learn the format, because you're going to be able to find games, especially Legacy. Right now, there are a lot more people playing Legacy because of being stuck at home. So you're going to be able to find people to play with, and you're going to be able to find people to learn the format from. And that really helps a lot to kind of like, learn the format and where things are. I use a rental service. I know a lot of other people do too. Those are great. Especially if you're going to use Magic Online, if you're going to play a lot, it can help you kind of figure out what you might like to play in the format. If you have enough of a rental service to rent most of the decks in the format, even for a while, spending $30, $40 a month just to figure out this is what I would like to play, makes sense to me. So there's a lot, because there's a lot to do in both formats. And just trying to figure out what you want to do is the biggest part of it.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of rental programs as well for stuff like that, especially if you're new and just starting out and trying to figure out what deck you want to play, because you can play as many decks as you want for one price, essentially, once you're signed up to a rental program, which is super awesome. The other thing I would say, my experience with the Eternal community, both Legacy and Vintage, is even though you see these expensive decks and you have a lot of players who have been playing Magic for a long, long time, I actually think it's one of the most welcoming parts of the Magic community. These are people who
it really is.
People, they want their format to grow, and they know that there's this barrier to entry that people face that keeps people from getting into the format sometime. So I have felt that the Legacy and Vintage people that I know go out of their way almost to try to welcome new players and help new players into the format more so than other formats I have played. Is that has that been your experience, Joe, as well?
Absolutely. The Legacy community is amazing. They all just want to see the format do what it does, and be good. And they want people to play and enjoy the format. Vintage more so. Vintage players are ridiculously generous with their time, ridiculously generous with being able to help people get into the format. I've been lent cards before for paper events, just on the basis of, I know you, I'm going to lend you this card, blah, 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 just so that you can play. And same thing with the Legacy. There have been people in my area, there's a guy in my area who lends whole decks out to people if they want to come play Legacy.
Yeah,
That
was my experience.
It's great.
I'd only played one Legacy event at a local I think it's like a 5K or something like that, and somebody that I didn't even know. I don't think I've ever met them before in my life. They were just like, "Here, did you want to?" It's like, but you have duels in this. You don't even know me, right? Like all that other stuff, and it was just like. But I guess the thing is for a lot of them, it's just like, oh, these are cards I've had forever. So they were they're like the price to me that I got them at pretty much, right? Cause I'm not, but they're not selling them, but I mean, that's just how they feel about it. And I played this 5K and all my opponents were super nice and super informative. Cause I'm like, hey, this is my first Legacy tournament. They're like, oh, they weren't even secretive about what they were doing. Like, oh yeah, I'm playing a Storm deck. So I'm going to try to do this, this, and this. And it was just so welcoming and it was great for a new player. And so if you can find somebody that has the cards and all that, I think it's actually a great community.
Yeah. I actually had a friend of mine now, but I didn't know the guy at all before I met him, at Star Cities, the Power 9, not last year, but the year before. Their Power 9 challenge. I borrowed Bizarra Baghdad's from him on site. Had only been talking to him through Reddit. He's one of the guys that works with a group of vintage Legacy players called the Lone Star Lurgoyfs out of Texas. And talked to him on Reddit because I had a borrow hookup that fell through for that. And he was like, I will get you covered. He goes, mine are not being used for this event, so we'll just meet on site. And sure enough, we got on site, met him up with him, and he handed me 4 Bizarre Baghdad to play with that day. And it was wild.
To put that in context, Bizarre Baghdad, I mean, it has been as high as $2,000. Right now it's $1,200. So a playset of those is kind of like a almost stranger trusting you with $5,000, $8,000 and just be like, hey, yeah, have fun with it. So, it's super amazing that people are like that. It's such an awesome community, which I think is one of the big reasons that I would encourage people to check it out too. I think obviously if you're going to check it out on Magic Online. It's hard for me to recommend hey, go out and buy Power 9 and give Vintage a shot.
Go buy duels casually and then find out you don't like the deck.
But it's cheap on Magic Online. The community's great. Events, you were telling me before cast, Joe, are actually growing a lot right now and seeing way more players than they were in the past.
Yeah, so we had our first week of super qualifiers last week for Players Tour qualification, and one of those events was Legacy, the last event actually, which was the Thursday morning event. And there was close to, what I kept hearing was close to almost 260 players for this event. Which is amazing, honestly, because usually these events only get around 100 something players for Legacy. Now there's some attributing to factors to there. Everybody's stuck indoors, wanting to play on Magic Online. But also B, they open these events up a little bit more, it felt like, because typically a lot of these PTQ style events generally only require qualifier points to enter, which are a little bit harder for people to get if they're not grinding Magic Online. So you got those guys that are just real hardcore, Legacy grinders. And even then, one of the guys I know, Topher Stitzen, he had mentioned, I think before, that he had a hard time getting 40 QPs for a PTQ because of having to play in all the preliminary events and how many get delivered by a league and that sort of thing. But for these events, they were open to either 40 QPs or also you could also enter with 40 tickets, or you could also open with 400 play points. So I think that actually opened things up a little bit more and enticed more people to play.
Yeah, 40
by
QPs is actually quite a bit. I think you get like 3 or
Yeah.
4 from winning a league, which is a 5 rounds, and it's not that
Yeah.
easy to go 5-0. So you need to win like 10 leagues or spike. I think there are qualifier tournaments. So that is a lot for the average person who isn't grinding full time.
But I also know that like we've also had like for the challenge events on the weekend, there have been a lot more players playing in the challenge events. Also, like for vintage, especially, they've had challenge events where we've had over 100 something players for the vintage challenge events, and they've been like the biggest challenge events we've had on the format on the platform. So more people are playing and getting out there. And then once we get back to some semblance of normalcy, and if we whatever happens, but in the fall, there's a 40K in September in St. Louis that has a cap of 250 players, and that event sold out within a half hour.
That is
at $200 entry.
Yeah, that's an event we'll see where the world is at, but that's an event that I've been planning on going to and really excited for, which would be super fun. So you hear like, oh, Legacy's dead, Vintage is dead. And while it is true that there is less like high level tournament support, I think there's like no Magic Fest this year for Legacy, SCG dropping it. When you hear dead though, that doesn't mean people aren't playing it, as that 40K and the growth recently on Magic Online shows. And Magic Online, really, you can play games of Vintage or Legacy whenever you want to. I know that's one of maybe the sticking points depending on your location. Like for me, where I live in the boonies in upstate New York, if I had a Vintage deck, I wouldn't be able to do a whole lot with it without driving a couple of hours, even though the East Coast has a pretty good Vintage scene. But I would have to drive a couple hours to be able to play because I'm in the middle of nowhere. But Magic Online, you could just fire up a Vintage league with whatever cards you want for way, way cheaper, a fraction of the prices it would be in paper, and play as many games as you want. So I think it's definitely an awesome option for people who want that eternal fix right now, but maybe are, stuck inside, unable to travel to events and do that. So I would definitely very much recommend that for people to check out.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. I try to play on as much as I can and I play around with all sorts of different stuff. So I played around with pretty much everything in the format, both formats at this point.
So I think we're going to have to answer a couple of fish mail here on the way out the door. But Joe, is there anything else you want to say about Legacy or Vintage? And also make sure to let people know where they can find your articles and your content.
Yeah, I'd say if you're interested and you're on the fence, just give it an open mind and just try it. It's not for everybody. Either format isn't. And it's not always going to be for everybody, but if you just kind of approach it with like an open mind, I think you'll find that you might like it. And that can be good for you. And if you don't like it, that's fine. Nobody's pressuring you to do it or anything like that. But, if you don't find that you want to play the format, that's great. But if you find that you enjoy it, then even better. So, but you can always find, like I said, Seth mentioned earlier, you can always find my work, This Week in Legacy, every week, as well as, the Vintage 101 column that I also write as well. And I've been really, really grateful, for the Legacy community, especially, for the responses to my articles every week. They're fantastic. A lot of the people out there that I'm good friends with are just awesome people, and they really love seeing the content come out this week. So
yeah, so definitely check those out at mtggoldfish.com. They're really good articles, great overviews of the meta and different topics. So definitely check those out. But anyway, let's answer a couple of fish mail before we wrap things up for today. If you would like your question answered, send it in to @mtggoldfish on Twitter, hashtag it #mtgfishmail, and we will get to it next week. Not a ton of questions today. If we miss one, we'll try to get to it next week, but a couple. First from Wojosa, at Wojosa. The price of Secret Lair fetch lands is clearly based on secondary market. Do you think the creation of Modern, which has no reserve list cards, in the slow drip of expensive reprints was a long con to be able to sell pricey singles?
Seth, I think that's that's too MTG finance for me.
I mean, okay,
yeah,
so
I got nothing.
Okay, so yeah, every format is, I mean, if you think about it literally, every format is quote unquote the long con to be able to sell singles. That's why formats exist. That's why Magic exists. Like I don't even think that's like necessarily a bad thing. Like that's why the whole game exists. So yes, in a literal sense, Modern was created so Wizards would be able to sell us Magic cards, because that's what every decision Wizards makes is based on. That's not a bad thing though, because it gives players something they enjoy, a format that is really fun and gives them enjoyment. Wizards gets money out of the deal. So I would say the answer is yes, but I think the question kind of framed it in a negative way, when I don't think it's a negative. I think that is, it's a positive. It's a win-win, because we get a cool format. Wizards gets to make money and keep making Magic cards for us. Everyone wins to some extent.
Yeah.
Nope.
I agree with that.
Speaking of fetch lands, from Droko Lucian, thoughts on the possibility of Commander Legends as a non-standard reprint spot for fetches? Would that be a good place, seeing that Wizards has shifted their focus to EDH as a format?
Wait, what was that last part of the question again?
Would Commander Legends be a good spot to reprint fetch lands, since Wizards has shifted their focus to EDH recently?
Yes, I think that was something I had talked about right when they announced the fetches, right, from the Secret Layers. It's that I think that they had mentioned they are going to reprint them at some point later this year, right? So I feel like that's the perfect set. That's why not, right? Like, it's not in standard, so you don't have to worry about it, messing up that whole gameplay and play pattern and whatnot. And it goes into the format that a lot of people want fetch lands for. So
agreed. Yeah. Especially if they print anything else that's like legacy format warping.
Yeah.
Well, there will be probably.
Oh, I'm sure there will be.
Oh man.
That's every set now.
That is
this
true.
one. This one is for you guys. The Lord of Mies says, anyone that plays MTG and has seen the new Clone Wars movie, is it just me, or does Echo look like the dude from Ad Nauseam? I have not seen the new Clone Wars movie, so I'm leaning on both of you.
Yes.
Wait, we're talking Clone Wars, the animated series?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen any of the animated series. I've only seen the movies. So bad. This is all you.
Yeah. No, I can definitely see it. Echo's, yeah, he's kind of got all these tubes in him and stuff like that. Yeah, so I can see it.
I'm gonna have to look it up now and see how similar it actually is.
The season is fantastic.
Ooh, where is it streaming?
Disney Plus currently.
Oh, okay. I will.
They are week to week though. Unfortunately, I want them to release the rest of the season yesterday because it's just it's just so good. It's so good.
From @DuckOat, regarding Wizards giving mystery boosters to local game stores, Wizards Play Network stores, doesn't it feel like they could or should do more? Stores may have thousands in overhead a month just to stay open. A few booster boxes of profit, even at no cost, seems insignificant. Is this just a PR move? So it was announced earlier this week, maybe, that Wizards was going to give local game stores some free mystery booster boxes that they could sell in this tough time with all the coronavirus stuff. PR move, or something that's actually significantly helping local game stores?
I think it's fine. I don't know what you would expect them to do more. They may be doing more. You don't know. We don't know exactly what they're gonna do for game stores. They're not holding up. They're doing all this other stuff like F&M at home and giving stores ways to connect with their players while they're not in events and whatnot. And I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's a bad thing.
I mean, free money's free money. Sure, is free mystery boosters going to save a local game store if they have to be closed down for 6 months? Probably not, but is $1,000 or however, I don't know how many booster boxes they're going to give each store, but is just essentially giving stores that amount of cash a bad thing? No, I mean, I think it's kind of like, honestly, the stimulus package that is happening nationwide, sending people $1,200 or whatever, is that going to keep people going for 6 months if they can't work? No. Is it a bad thing that you're helping people, pay their bills? Also, no. It would be my take on it, so.
Right.
Yeah. Like it definitely does not like keep the store. Like it helps, yeah. Because like if you think about the state, like that whole package, I think it's like if it's like $1,200, that's like not even rent in California.
All right, one more question for this week, and I think this is a good one to end on. From Gregory Emin, if you could choose one card for you to have your face on it, like an invitational card, but a card that is already printed, what card would you choose? Called shot, Krim says Lazov. So that is from Gregory. Added that Krim part in there. So if you could have your face on one existing Magic the Gathering card, what would it be?
You know, okay, that called shot isn't necessarily missing the mark. It's pretty close. Like it's either Lazov or, I mean, if I have to pick like legendary stuff, right, or anything like that, it's Lazov or Amanatu. Actually, I really like Amanatu. Like, can you imagine like they would just
now I'm imagining that.
Yeah, just imagine that.
That's so creepy,
wouldn't it? It'd be great. It'd be great. I'd look like the little boy from The Grudge for anyone that watches horror movies, and it would be perfect. And I had a bowl cut when I was younger, so I already nailed the look. Just like slap me with some like I don't know, white powder makeup, and then I would get extra pasty, and then it'll be perfect.
Oh God.
What about you, Joe? What card would you like your face on if you could choose?
Can I one up Krim on the creepy factor and say Cabal Therapy? Not the new art, the old art, the new art. Yeah, the new art doesn't exist.
I mean, I guess I'll stick with creepy too and go with maybe Uncle Estevan. He's got a good
Uncle.
Beard. I could see my head on that body.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
No, it's pretty on point. That's good. Yeah. Oh man,
the old Cabal Therapy for some odd reason just screams like Alien to me. So
it's great. Yeah. I love it. It's my favorite art in all of Magic.
Like the Judgment artwork is pretty sweet.
I actually own German language original Cabal Therapies.
Oh, that's beautiful.
They're amazing. I love them to death. The only other one I could possibly say at that point would be Veteran Explorer, because that's kind of on brand for me. But yeah, that would also be good too. So
I think it'd be funny if like they ironically just like as a joke put me on like a Veil of Summer reprint.
Carnage Tyrant.
Carnage Tyrant. Yes, perfect. So
with the glowing red eyes.
So me.
On that note, I think that brings us to the end of our fish mail. So again, if you want your question answered next week, send them in at MTGGoldfish on Twitter, hashtag them MTGFishmail. And I also think that brings us to the end of episode 270 of the Goldfish Cast. So, Joe, thanks so much for joining us this week, talking about Legacy and Vintage. Hopefully get a chance to do it again at some point in the future.
I hope so too. That would be great.
And Krim, of course, thank you for joining us as well. Thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks to Card Conduit for supporting the show. So on that note, we're done for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about whatever goes on in the world of Magic, which we know will at least include some number of Ikoria spoilers, which start on Thursday. So have a wonderful week, everyone. We'll be back next Monday. Until then, this is the crew signing out.